Joining us on the phone from CBS Sports Radio and CBSSports.com. Am I right? Are those the two ways to introduce you now, Doug Gottlieb? Doug.
You just say from CBS is fine.
Okay. How are things? I know it's early. Thank you for getting up and doing this early in the morning for you.
Not that early. I mean, I got all three kids off to school. I'm about to get a little workout on. I mean, it's not like I'm out in Hawaii where it's like, 5 a.m.
It'd be early for me, though. 8:45, I'm still asleep usually. But, all right, here's my question for you. And I will set it up, and before I respond, I want to hear your take. I see you ranking UK number 7, and I say that's a troll move by a guy looking for attention, because how do you rank Kentucky number 7, especially behind the guy's alma mater at number 6, Oklahoma State? Tell me I'm wrong, and that at least you are sincere about Kentucky as the 7th best team in the country.
Well, I mean, a troll move would be somebody who is on Twitter or something. I've been doing this for how many years now? It's my 11th year doing it?
Yes.
I don't believe I've ever ranked Oklahoma State outside of the year after the Final Four in the top 15, and even the year after the Final Four, I thought they would drop off. So that's uneducated and stupid in terms of my alma mater. No one has ever called me a homer who's actually followed my work. As a matter of fact, it's been the opposite of such. I treat everybody the same and fair. The problem with people is, first, it's not blasphemy to rank somebody 5 or 6 spots below somebody else. There's 350 teams. So when you say somebody might be 7th as opposed to 1st or 2nd, it's like, really? We're talking about the subjectivity of one person's opinion. Secondly, we have no guide to go on. The only thing I can go on is their lone upperclassman who would have played left. What I know is I know that Marcus Smart's an incredible leader. I know they got, for example, Oklahoma State has their top 7 scorers back, and they will be very good this year. And the problem is that people like yourself, if that's the assumption that's made, look at the world in a bubble and say, we got this incredible recruiting class, so we got to be number 1 or number 2. The problem with it is the world doesn't exist in a bubble. As good as the front line for Kentucky should be, I can easily make the case that Arizona's is as good or better. And then when you consider the experience they have in their backcourt, and I'm not talking about who's going to be an NBA draft pick. I'm talking about experience and virtues as college players. You can start to see, wait a second. Now, remember, I got Kansas ranked below them. Kansas has got incredible talent, unbelievable recruiting class, and they have some experienced players coming back, even at the point guard position. But I'm not buying that all of the equity that they cashed in last year in experience is, at this point, worthy of being ranked ahead of, for example, an Oklahoma State team, beat them on their floor, finish 1 game behind them.
So are your rankings, because some people do this differently, and are your rankings based on the way you think the teams are today or the way you think they will finish?
It's a kind of a combination of it. It's like, look, I can't tell you how the Harrison twins, how they're going to lead this team. I haven't, based on what I've heard, it's been better than people thought. I still know that you play with one basketball, and the best team, not the best collection of talent, wins. Perfect example is last year's Kentucky team.
But you would agree the talent for this Kentucky team way exceeds last year's.
I would say it exceeds last year's. The old way exceeds last year's.
Well, it's the best recruiting class. Recruiting people, Doug, say this is the best recruiting class in the last, not just Kentucky. Overall, it's a...
Yeah, but that's because we're in this hyperbole era where people follow recruiting more, so they rank recruiting more. Again, okay, is that a good recruiting class? It's an excellent recruiting class. Okay, look at, again, the world doesn't exist in a bubble. Look at what, for example, Duke has. And Duke, a team...
And by the way, to rank Duke high, Doug, don't you have to rank Duke high? You have to trust their freshmen will be good?
Yes, but I also have Rodney Hood, who I know is going to be...
Who was at Mississippi State and was a mediocre player there.
I would completely disagree with your assumption that he was a mediocre player.
Well, I mean, I watched his Mississippi State games.
If your assessment is he was a mediocre player, then I disagree with your ability to evaluate college talent.
Doug, I watched Mississippi State play. If Mississippi State, the 2 years,
I didn't say Mississippi State they were mediocre. Okay, I'm saying Rodney Hood. Rodney Hood was outstanding during his time at Mississippi State, especially considering he didn't play with a quality point guard. The Stansbury thing was taken on. I'm not disputing how Mississippi State was. I'm disputing your.
Don't you think if he was excellent, don't you think they make the tournament?
No. Do you remember that team?
Yes, they had a couple. They had a couple. That team was preseason number 1 in the SEC that year, and they were dreadful.
I don't believe they were preseason number 1 in the SEC.
Well, they were preseason, number 2 to Kentucky. Number 2 to Kentucky. But that team was suspected to be good. No, look, they didn't have their. If you want to get into Mississippi State, they had a poison pill that they swallowed. And with Renardo Sidney.
They didn't have their point guard the first half of that season because he'd gone to the NBA and then come back. So I'm not getting into I didn't call it to dispute Mississippi State. You said Rodney Hood was a mediocre player. I greatly disagree. No one thinks he's a mediocre player. He's a stud. And then you add in Jabari, and then you add in Rasheed Suleiman. My question with them is Quinn Cook. Is he the Quinn Cook that played poorly in the NCAA tournament, or is he the Quinn Cook that played really well in the early half of the season and played well against Louisville in the Bahamas? I don't know. And then they don't have any sort of. They're going to be long and athletic. They're very different than any Duke team. But people, again, don't make the assumption that because you got the greatest recruiting class ever, okay, that's fine. It's like Michigan had the greatest recruiting class ever when they had the Fab Five.
And they went to the finals both years.
They did. They did, but they also.
Would you have ranked them number 7?
Do you want me to go back and go through look?
No, but here's my point, Doug.
If you're gonna have me on, you got your whole radio show. You can discuss this ad nauseum. Look at what Michigan State brings back. They're completely and totally worthy of being a national title contender. I think
totally agree.
Should be a national title contender. I think Louisville should be a national title contender. I think Oklahoma State should be a national title contender. I think all of those teams are. And my 2 biggest fears with Kentucky, or 3, are they only play with 1 ball. Okay. 2, you don't have any veteran experience like the team that won the national title 2 years ago. You just don't have any stabilizing forces like you had 2 years ago. You just don't. And
wait a minute. How can you say that, Doug? Doug, they have 2 guys. They have the same talent they had 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they had 2 guys in Jones and Lamb, and now they have Poitras and Willie Cauley-Stein. The difference is they don't have Darius Miller, but he was the 6th man on that team.
Yeah, but again, the strength of those 3 guys were all guys that handled the basketball. And where's Poitras going to play on this team? Where's Willie?
He's probably going to be on the bench.
Correct.
To be honest with you, he's probably going to be on the bench.
You're going to throw 5 talented freshmen out there. Okay?
Yes.
And what you're judging it based upon is where they're ranked and where you think will be drafted.
No, I'm judging it based on the talent.
Look at Louisville's team the last 2 years. Was that a really talented team the last 2 years?
I think they were more talented than people give credit. But let's do this. Let's look at 2 years. No, Doug, let's look at 2 years ago. A freshman-laden Kentucky team.
The exception. 2 years ago was the exception. Okay? 2 years ago is the exception, not the norm.
Why is it the exception? How many teams, just answer me this, because we just got a couple minutes left. Doug, answer me this. Listen, you're smart. Just answer me this.
Go through my top 6 records.
Never mind, Doug. Go ahead. Just say what you want. You're not going to answer any of my questions, so go ahead.
No. Go through the top 6 teams that I have and tell me who's not worthy of being there.
Oklahoma State, I'll put it like this. Okay, are you going to answer a question? Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
If you go person by person in the roster, you'll never convince me, outside of the point guard spot, that Kentucky's not better at every position on the roster than Oklahoma State.
Okay. Kentucky does not have a wing as good as Markel Brown as a college player.
You don't think James Young will be a better player than, what's his name?
Then what's his name, Markel Brown?
You don't think
Oklahoma State play?
How many times have you seen these freshmen play for Kentucky?
Do I think eventually they would? I think the LeBron Nash would be the one guy who, when he plays, he's a star. Sometimes he doesn't, and I'm betting on the fact that LeBron Nash, the second half of the season on. Remember, he was as highly touted a player as anybody who plays at Kentucky.
He was not more highly touted than Julius Randle. He was not.
whatever. I mean, he's the best player in the state of Texas.
Okay, Julius Randle was first or second best player. Jay Billis, Doug, says Julius Randle's one of the best players in a decade.
Right. Okay. So go back and look at how LeBron Nash was regarded. Look, I thought he was overrated coming out of school. He's playing the power forward. They play small. And look, it has absolutely zero to do with being my alma mater. If it did, then you'd have to go back and find some other link to me being some sort of homer. You know, the problem is that in your own world, you're simply going based upon how talented kids are.
I will say this. There are 6. We just got a minute left, Doug.
Basketball team.
There are 6 CBS writers. You can call me names if you want. There are 6 CBS writers. 5 of them have Kentucky. Do they live in a bubble?
Good. No, they're betting on the fact that they will be cohesive. They also didn't play and didn't coach. And
so you know more than they do, is what you're saying. You know more.
No.
Well, you just say they didn't play and didn't coach. So you're saying you know more than they do.
No, my perspective is different. My perspective is that if you go through teams, and I'm sure Kentucky fans can find, they'll say, you know what, we actually had more talented teams that didn't win a national title. And you say, well, why do you win a national title? Everything has to kind of come together, and sometimes you got to be a little lucky. I mean, how Louisville doesn't win the national title unless a walk-on comes off the bench and it's
totally agree with that.
Right?
Totally agree with that. Look, you're exactly right about that. Totally agree.
Basically what I did was I took the top 8 teams in the country that I thought could win the whole thing, and Oregon was the one team that I didn't feel great about, but I thought, man, those 2 freshmen from last year, and then you add in Mike Moser, you have their recruiting class, kind of a funky style, and I think the Pac-12 is a very good league.
Doug, I hate to do this but we got to. Show's about to end. I do appreciate you taking the time. You and I appreciate you taking the time to come on. Have a good day, man. I thank you. 502. Why am I giving you the number? We're out of here. Thanks to Doug Gottlieb. Thanks to folks from the 6 Man. We'll see you later. This is Kentucky Sports Radio.